This week on Act Out, how high can you go? The costs of health insurance continue to rise sharply. Our push to build power, reach out to others, and rattle thrones must escalate in kind. Next, climate and environmental experts fired for researching and spreading the truth. Are we going to let their voices be silenced? Finally, Nora Barrows-Friedman joins us to talk about her recent trip to Palestine. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out.
Rockets! Blockade! Bulldozers swarm outside the checkpoint gate. An orange flash broke the hush and blew me into the street. I awoke next to the body of my baby. No!
Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. So, as noted last week, one of the things that this impeachment frenzy is helping Dems to do is avoid legitimate issues like, for instance, Medicare for all. And for good reason. Dems and their big insurance and big pharma overlords will do almost anything to avoid the issue of universal health care, which is consistently listed as one of the most important issues for U.S. voters. And that, too, for good reason. 2/3 of people who file for bankruptcy cite medical issues as a key contributor to their financial downfall, and some 80% of those who file for bankruptcy due to medical bills have insurance. Meanwhile, a recent annual survey of employers found that health insurance costs are now topping $20,000 a year for family plans. In other words, it's like buying a new car every year in order to survive. The report states that while employers pay most of the cost of coverage, according to the survey, workers' average contribution is now $6,000 for a family plan. And that's just their share of upfront premiums, and doesn't include co-payments, deductibles, and other forms of cost sharing once they need care. So $6,000 for coverage that you don't use. If you do use it, all of those extra costs rack up real fast, which most, if not all of you watching this already know. And recall the report from 2018 that showed that only 39% of Americans have enough savings to cover a $1,000 emergency. In other words, if you get sick in this country, it'd actually be cheaper for your family to let you die and bury you in the backyard than to actually take care of you. How insane is that? I'm just curious, where are the pro-life people on this one? Where are the American exceptionalists on this one? Where are the folks that love touting the glory and wonder of this city upon a hill? Truth is that most of them are living this reality. Most people who wear those shirts that say shit like USA, love it or leave it, are the same ones that work shit-paying jobs, live in poor white forgotten shitholes, with barely 2 pennies to rub together but always enough to buy an American flag, and wave it as they slowly die of something easily avoidable that their CEO could have paid to fix 14 times over and still have enough for his second yacht. And herein lies the sad irony of our system, and indeed the greatest barrier to our progress. That those who themselves are among the oppressed take pride in their oppression, idolize their oppressors, and seek solace in the fact that they are not the most oppressed. They glorify a freedom that they don't have, a bravery built on the backs of those who dared to fight for that freedom, and no, I'm not talking about soldiers. And I'm taking the extreme end here as an example, but we have all been, possibly still are, guilty of towing the establishment line on something that makes our lives shittier, that makes our futures unlivable, simply because it seems honorable or patriotic or in some other way makes us feel like we share some common American identity, as absurd and unrealistic and dangerous as that is. Even if we know it's whack, we rationalize it. Offshore drilling in the name of energy independence. More wars in the name of national security. More surveillance in the name of national security. Harsher sentences for prisoners of nonviolent crimes in the name of state and local security. More police on the streets in the name of the same. Harsher treatment of migrants because, we just don't have the resources for them. Feeding into and voting in the same corrupt one-party system over and over and over again because that's just how the system has to be set up. And all the while, we lose ourselves in the mire of patriotism. As Václav Havel wrote in his searing essay The Power of the Powerless, ideology, is a veil behind which human beings can hide their own fallen existence, their trivialization, and their adaptation to the status quo. The primary excusatory function of ideology, therefore, is to provide people, both as victims and pillars, of the system with the illusion that the system is in harmony with the human order and the order of the universe. This holding on to the idea that our system is good, be it in extreme ways or in small ways, is a sick salve that soothes us as it kills us, that melts us down into a stew of obedient sameness, where we not only lose ourselves, but we also lose the thread that connects us, that creates solidarity between we, the people, against the forces that always place profit above people. In order to build the kind of power that will guarantee everyone the basic human right of healthcare, for instance, we have to scrub that ideology from our minds. We have to find ourselves in that mire of a capitalist bog. We have to find and pick up that thread. We have to, yes, reach out to those guys with their love it or leave it shirts, looking at you, fellow white folks. We have to meet people where they're at and speak to our shared experiences within this twisted system. You gotta sit on porches with people and have beers. Meet up with folks at church, at a community center, at a fucking block party, and dare to talk about something other than waxing your car or period cramps. Dare to talk about the shit that matters beyond what's condoned by an impeachment-crazed corporate media and a bought and sold government. I mean, actually, why stay quiet about any of this? Does anyone enjoy spending thousands on basic medical care? Does anyone enjoy having their teeth rot out of their damn skull because dental is hardly ever included in basic plans? Why stay quiet in order to comfort the comfortable? Why stay quiet and lose yourself, amputate your power? Our silence, our division is their lifeblood, and we are all being bled dry. Speaking of daring to do shit without permission, last year in October, the EPA disbanded the Particulate Matter Review Panel, part of the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee, because, fuck science. Last week, Nation of Change reported that this group of 20 scientists charged with reviewing the nation's air quality standards plans to convene and to issue a report on the country's air pollution regulations anyway. Fuck yeah. As they should. Laws are only as good as the consent that we give to follow them. These scientists should absolutely keep meeting, and so should the scientists that are on the Marine Protected Areas Federal Advisory Committee, the Interior Department's Invasive Species Advisory Committee, and the Presidential Advisory Council on Combating Antibiotic-Resistant Bacteria. Last week, the Trump administration defunded all of those intense-sounding committees that had been working for over a decade on marine life, invasive species, and combating antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So newsflash, we need these panels and committees. And if the government says otherwise, we have two choices. Accept that, or don't accept that. Incidentally, it's the same choice that California has when the Trump administration says that it can't have stricter pollution standards. Sure, they should sue. Use the courts. Why not? They're there. But California should also make clear that dumb-shitted fascist and ultimately suicidal policies will not be followed. And I know it sounds like I'm oversimplifying in order to make it sound easier, but the foundational decision really is that easy. Are we going to follow unjust laws? Or are we going to become outlaws for ourselves, each other, and the planet we live on? Laws are only, again, as good as the consent to follow them. And we cannot wait for our governments to condone the very actions that threaten their absolute power. We have to meet, we have to act, and we have to build. And that's not to say that we shouldn't fight decisions like disbanding EPA panels or slashing EPA pollution regulations. It means that as we argue these decisions in court, we should keep doing the things that they're so threatened by. Don't let them talk or push us down. Laws are changed by the flick of the wrist. Our principles, our very survival, should not be so easily swayed. Finally, this week, we sit down with Nora Barrows-Friedman to talk about her recent trip to Palestine, the farce of elections, and our role in the fight for human rights and justice in Palestine. Take a look.
I was there for about 3 weeks, and I was actually leading a delegation of mostly Americans. There were a couple Canadians, just to, get a sense for them of the situation on the ground, especially for Palestinians. So many people have come back, really eager to join and support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is a Palestinian-led civil society, global, international solidarity movement to pressure their governments, their universities, investment portfolio holders to divest from Israel's war crimes and its apartheid structures. And other people are, working in their own communities to, to talk to their local city councils, for example, to stop contracting with businesses that are contracted with Israel, for example. So people, it's really important for Americans, especially to go to Palestine and witness these kinds of things. But I think the real work is here. To try and dismantle support for Israel in any way, shape they can. Every time I've gone since 2004, you can see the situation getting worse and worse. The Israeli elections are, just another dog and pony show for all intents and purposes, because, as you said, there isn't any change for Palestinians on the ground. Whether it's war criminal A or war criminal B that's going to be heading the government, they are both, strongly adhering to the Zionist ideology of the State of Israel, which says explicitly that Palestine should not be for Palestinians, but for Israeli Jews alone. It's really disheartening, but also not surprising to see, kind of mainstream liberal organizations, politicians, and individuals, wanting so bad for Netanyahu to get out of office. Obviously, he should be tried for war crimes in The Hague, but that's a different story. And kind of, hoping that somebody more, quote, moderate like Benny Gantz will succeed him. Benny Gantz, if you do just a tiny little bit of research on him, also has a history of war crimes under his belt. He, helped order the attack on 2014 in Gaza, which killed, more than 2,000 people, 550 children included. His policies, he's stated that his policies are basically going to be the same as all Israeli politicians before him, where it is increased ethnic cleansing, increased, land confiscation, and increased occupation of Palestinians.
And with regards to Gantz and the whole like tit for tat that's going on with those elections, there seems to be more talk now about an all-out war on Gaza and a full-blown annexation of the West Bank.
Yeah.
Is that something that seems like it's looming? Is that looming because of the election, or would that be looming anyway?
Yeah, well, both. Israel, since its inception, 70 odd years ago, has always had its designs on the entire area of historic Palestine. And of course, Netanyahu has promised increased attacks on Gaza. He knows that isn't just rhetoric. It is actual, not just state policy, but a way to kind of whip up support. So, to get, the majority of Israelis in Israel, sad to say, but it's true, want increased wars on Gaza. It is an increasingly racist, violent apartheid society. And so he knows that it's really easy to drum up support for his campaign by promising more viciousness, more lethal attacks, more genocide in Gaza. And Benny Gantz is the same. As I said, he already ordered one huge attack on Gaza 5 years ago. And again, to whip up support for his campaign, he's also described his designs on Gaza again, as well as full annexation of the West Bank. There isn't much West Bank left that hasn't been annexed by Israel's colonization policies. I mean, in August when I was there, the landscape had changed so dramatically from when I was there previously. Entire forests and kind of wilderness areas are being wiped out for construction of new settlement blocks, especially around Jerusalem. You see Palestinians inside Jerusalem being expelled at an accelerated rate. House demolitions are on the rise all over the place. The militarization of the Jordan Valley in so-called Area C, which is under full Israeli military control in the West Bank. People there are also facing increased home demolitions, annexation of their land, and restrictions on access to clean water and agricultural fields and schools, hospitals, clinics. It is increasingly militarized everywhere you go. And unfortunately, whoever's going to be heading the next parliament will just promise more of the same.
I wanted to touch on another thing too. I was wondering, like, if this was brought up at all by the Palestinian folks that you spoke with, the Palestinian elections, and I wondered if I say this comparison, if you could tell me if I'm right. In Kashmir, there are elections for Kashmiri politicians, but they really don't have any power because the Indian state has control over that part of Kashmir. Is it kind of the same feeling in Palestine?
Absolutely. I mean, there haven't actually been Palestinian elections since, I think, 2006. So they've had the same quisling government for a very long time, a government that has increasingly worked with Israel in so-called security coordination policies to basically do Israel's bidding in the West Bank primarily. And so you see, for example, I saw once with my own eyes several years ago, a Palestinian was wanted by Israel. And the Palestinian Authority security forces, arrested him from his house, put him in the back of one of their vehicles, and dropped him off at the checkpoint where an Israeli military jeep was waiting. There was a very quick transfer from one vehicle to the other. And this is very common, especially in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. For many, many, many Palestinians, they look at the Palestinian Authority as basically a subcontractor of the Israeli occupation. That's the thing. People can have elections, under occupation, but that doesn't really change facts on the ground, especially when you have an administration like the Palestinian Authority doing the work of Israel for it. And we'll see what happens when and if there are Palestinian elections. We know that in 2006, when there were elections, in Gaza, the Hamas party won, and it was basically, a vote against the Fatah movement, which is in power in the West Bank, and for that, Gaza has been punished, not just by Israel for electing the wrong party, but by the PA in the West Bank.
And with regards to the wrong party, I mean, when people hear about Hamas, it's so, it's like through the New York Times or something. Right. It's so clearly skewed. Could you give folks a more balanced perspective of who Hamas is and why they have support in places like Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, it's very multifaceted. I think that, as I said, Hamas was elected in 2006 because people were upset with the Palestinian Authorities' relationship with Israel, and they saw Hamas as sort of an alternative to, the existing power structure there. Hamas absolutely is not, a progressive political party. They're it's a very religious, very, strict fundamentalist political party. But, they have done social services. They've set up social services inside Gaza where there wasn't any before. And they have a pretty considerable amount of support in Gaza because of the fact that the alternative, the Fatah party, is not really an alternative. Is not much of an alternative at all. And so and of course, Hamas, like you said, has been branded as kind of this like blanketed term of a terrorist organization, right? So it's one more way that the West and Israel can point to the people of Gaza and say, you're ruled by a terrorist organization, and therefore you do not deserve any freedom. Therefore, we are going to punish you collectively, which is actually a war crime under the Geneva Convention, by imposing this siege that's gone on for more than 11 years, blocking any sort of, regular trade and goods into Gaza. The hospitals inside Gaza have been impacted severely from this blockade, meant to punish Hamas and the people. Medicines are constantly at, below considerable levels. Sometimes they're at zero stock. Antibiotics are very scarce in Gaza, as are medicines for cancer. Dialysis machines are few and far between. And then when people don't have access to the medical care that they need, they are put through this humiliating process of applying for a travel permit from, the authorities at the border, which is coordinated by Egypt and Israel, at the southern border, because Gazans rarely can travel out of Gaza through the northern boundary with Israel. So it's an intensely awful situation for Palestinians in Gaza. And, the international community, as it's done for many decades now, has kind of, turned an eye away from the suffering in Gaza and has basically abandoned the people there.
Do you think that it's a valid path to try and go the UN route, or how do you think that people should try to address this on an international scale?
Well, the UN, unfortunately, has missed its mark time and time again in trying to be an arbiter of justice for Palestinians. All the way since 1948 or 49, when it passed a resolution calling for the mandatory repatriation of Palestinian refugees that had been expelled in the years prior, when Israel was forming itself as a state. 800,000 Palestinians were violently expelled from their lands, homes, and properties. When Zionist militias swept the country and purged everybody. So that resolution has been ratified every year since then and has not been realized yet. And that's 70 years ago. The UN on the ground, plays an important role in terms of providing services for refugees in the refugee camps in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. But again, that those lifelines are being constantly pared down. The United States, Donald Trump just announced a few months ago that it was suspending all aid to the United Nations agencies that deals with Palestinian refugees. Therefore putting Palestinian refugees again in the crosshairs of collective punishment. Unfortunately, on the political level, the UN, passes these, resolutions saying that, Israel should not, build more settlements. Israel should not keep transferring civilians into its territory, which is another crime, against the Geneva Conventions, when it, abducts Palestinians from their homes and brings them into present-day Israel in prisons. That's an international war violation. But the UN has proven itself to be pretty impotent in terms of enforcing these resolutions and enforcing international law. So what Palestinian civil society is saying is that the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement needs to be amplified, needs to be supported, and it is one of the most important ways that a power like Israel will be held responsible for these crimes, because it's been shown that neither the UN nor the EU nor the US nor the International Court of Justice, for that matter, has been able to make Israel accountable and change its policies. So it is up to civil society. It's up to us as international, people who live and pay taxes in places like the United States, the taxes that go to support Israel's apartheid state, to dig deeper and support the boycotts and hold people accountable that way.
For more of Nora's work, check out electronicintifada.net. And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. A reminder, the best way to stay up to date on our work is to sign up for the newsletter at the address below. To those who have donated, thank you so much. Please keep spreading the word in order to ensure our ability to keep acting out. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left one of you motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been backing up inch by inch. We got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since you pushed and shoved my shove. I'm not a violent man, but